Professor Ibrahim Gambari has resumed his role as President Buhari's Chief of Staff. Gambari, who was Minister of External Affairs during the military rule of Buhari in 1984, on arrival at the presidential villa, was received by the State House Permanent Secretary, Malam Tijani Umar, and the Director of Protocol, Alhaji Yakubu Ahmed. So, Doctor, of course, Professor Gambari has now resumed his role as Chief of Staff to the President. We saw a lot of footage yesterday coming out from Aso Rock. Over to you.
Well, congratulations to Professor Ibrahim Gambari.
Yes.
Yesterday, you and I had a conversation about his appointment with Professor George Obiozor, who made it clear that he had known him for 50 years. And there is no doubt generally that everyone is convinced that he has the stature, he had the credentials, either as an academic or a scholar or a diplomat or even as a community leader, and he has experience. So he brings a whole wealth of experience, many years of achievement as an international diplomat and as a peacemaker in every troubled spot in the world, either in Myanmar or Sudan or Angola or even in Zimbabwe.
As the foreign policy said, the UN's favorite dictator whisperer.
Well, I don't know. That's what the critics are saying. But as Professor Obiozor pointed out yesterday, he will bring to it not just intellectualism to the job, but also a background in diplomacy.
Yes.
And he's in a very good position to assist the president to achieve his objectives. Now, some people have complained about age. But some other people have also said, well, he may be 75 years old, but he's not going there to lift weight or to engage in a relay race. He's going there to help manage the presidency. Secondly, people have also expressed concern about what will be his style, what will be his approach. And when that question was put to him yesterday, he made it very clear that as Chief of Staff, he will do the work. He's supposed to be seen and not heard.
Yes.
So he has already given us an indication of the kind of style that he would adopt. And then, of course, he made it very clear that his loyalty is to the president, not to the public. So in other words, he's saying that he's basically a presidential aide. And those who have complained about that statement probably do not understand the nature of his work. I mean, the Chief of Staff to the president is not a constitutional position. There's nowhere in the Constitution that his functions are spelled out. He's there as a personal aide of the president to assist the president in achieving his objectives and in ensuring coherence and balance within the environment. But what Professor Gambari can be sure of is that many Nigerians will be watching him closely because he's taking over that office at a time when that office had been heavily controversialized because of the circumstances surrounding the performance and the exit of his predecessor, the late Malam Abba Kyari. But the confidence that everyone has is that given his stature, he will be able to achieve a lot. And President Buhari had, played a fast one on Nigerians. You recall that after the death of Malam Abba Kyari, there were speculations about who would be there. In fact, on the pages of newspapers, some people were already doing as if they were doing dress rehearsal to take over the office. But, President Buhari has shown very clearly that, it is his decision.
Exactly.
And he has chosen a man who had worked with him before, 84 to 85, and who has been a lifelong friend. And it's a position of trust. And we hope that he will be given all the wherewithal to be able to provide the support to the president and the leadership to the remainder of the staff of the president.
Absolutely, Doctor. Couldn't have been said better. Now, let's take another news headline as the Nigeria Center for Disease Control have confirmed 6 new deaths and 184 new COVID-19 cases in 21 states and the Federal Capital Territory. Now, a total of 111 recoveries were also recorded yesterday, bringing the country's total to 1,070 recoveries. As of May 13th, 2020, there have been 4,971 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in 34 states and the Federal Capital Territory. Meanwhile, some very good news to bring to you this morning. A 98-year-old female is the oldest COVID-19 patient in Lagos to have been discharged from one of the isolation centers in the state. She was one of the 26 patients discharged in Lagos on Wednesday after testing negative twice for COVID-19. More so, the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC, has said that despite Nigeria's earnest search for a cure for COVID-19, it is yet to receive any pharmaceutical or herbal drugs for analysis of their efficacy as a prelude for their approval to treatment of the disease. NAFDAC explained that it's still awaiting the local cure for COVID-19 reportedly submitted by the Complementary and Alternative Medicine Department of the Federal Ministry of Health to the agency for evaluation. So, Doctor, yesterday, Professor Adeye, the DG of NAFDAC, came out to really and truly defend NAFDAC's position right now, and she said that they are yet to receive any pharmaceutical or herbal drugs for analysis of their efficacy for approval. This, of course, is contradicting what the Presidential Task Force had said a couple days ago, which we'll get into. But I just want us to point out, before we do discuss that in detail, I think it's brilliant news that a 98-year-old woman has recovered from coronavirus here in Lagos. I don't think we can skip that. That is amazing. That's made my day.
Well, you know, only the other day we were talking about the lady from Spain, yes. Maria, who survived at the age of 113. Yes. And the other examples from the UK, from the US, Dapshishis, yes. Tichen from the United Kingdom, and other examples from Holland and Japan. Now we have our own 98-year-old. But it's all about how active your immune system is. Exactly. But quickly, to the point you raised about Professor Adeye saying that NAFDAC has not received anything from anybody for evaluation. I think that's surprising. The chairman of the Presidential Task Force and the Minister of Health last Thursday reported that some 35 persons were already meeting with NAFDAC to work out modalities for testing some of the presentations by Nigerians involved in phytomedicine. And now you have the NAFDAC chief coming out to say, well, nobody has approached them with any formula for a cure. And that if there is any such formula, it must go through a clinical cycle. But she admitted, however, that only one company has approached NAFDAC, but that is not a proposed cure. It is to treat symptoms. Yes. And then what is even surprising is that she said they have not received anything from the Department of Complementary and Alternative Medicine of the Federal Ministry of Health, whereas there was a document in circulation indicating that that department of the Federal Ministry of Health had already submitted a particular herbal preparation to the NAFDAC. So there's lack of coordination. And that's surprising and that's shocking.
Clarity, to be very honest, at this point. But that is all that we have on the news headlines today. We'll take a short break now, and when we return, we'll be having our trio, Rota Sodiri, Michael Wilson, and Aaron Akerejola, here to give us updates on Africa and global business, and of course, COVID-19. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now is Rota Sodiri with business updates. Over to you, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Ase. Good morning, Leila. Yes, so we had a primary market auction yesterday. That's money market auctions. Money market instruments are instruments that mature in less than a year. So if you look at our primary market PMA table here, the key thing I want everybody to take a look at is the green arrow that shows the offer amount and the red arrow that shows the allotment. What usually happens, they have a 91-day offer, a 182-day offer, and 364. So, for example, the 91-day offer, 4.3 billion naira was offered. These are instruments that are offered to investors. Now, the second row, the subscription, usually exceeds the amount that's offered. So there's an oversubscription, meaning that more money was chasing after what you offered. So 91-day, 4.3 billion was offered, subscription was 22 billion. 182-day, 12.9 billion was offered, subscription was 41 billion. 16 billion was offered for the 364, 102 billion was. So it's usually oversubscribed. But the key thing here is the allotment. How much was allotted towards the offer? If you notice, it's much higher. So 19 billion there was allotted for the 4.3 billion offer, 40 billion for the 182, and 82 billion for the 364. If we move to the next table, we're going to look at this in graphical form. So the blue, the offer amount in blue, 4.3 billion for the 91-day, 12.9 for the 182, and 16.5 for the 364. The blue bar is the offer amount. The gray bar is the allotment. The allotment has exceeded the offer. This was for yesterday's auction. If you go to April 29th, the previous auction that happened 2 weeks ago, look at that. Offer amount in blue, and the allotment amounts in gray, the bars are exactly the same height.
And now it's exceeding.
Right. So now it's exceeding. So if we can go back to May for a second, what people are suggesting is that if we go back to President Buhari's 850 billion naira request of a loan, the Senate came out later and said, look, this isn't a fresh 850 billion. This is just the federal government saying that we wanted to borrow from the overseas market before, but because these are more expensive, we're going to move to the domestic market. So that is the reason why the allotment amount is now exceeding the offer amount, because the government is now saying that we need to borrow more from the domestic market, and that's why the allotment amount is increasing. If we move to the yield curve, I think that's the final table that we have here. The yield curve is now going to show you the movement in rates. So the blue line is from the May 13th auction. The orange line is from the April 29th auction. You'll see that the 91-day was 1.85%. That was the stop rate, the rate at which you're going to earn interest on the amount that was offered and essentially allocated. So 1.85% for the April 29th auction. It's increased up, it's moved, this is the first time it's moved in months, to 2.5% for the 91-day. 182-day was 2.49% for the April 29th auction, moved up to 285. The 364-day, well, that one has been flat, so that's still at 384. So what domestic investors are now saying is that, okay, wow, if the federal government is now coming to the domestic market and seeking more money to borrow, does that mean rates are finally going to rise? What analysts are saying is that, well, we shouldn't get too excited and expect rates to rise too much, that they're probably going to they'll rise, but not as much as where we saw 15%, 16% a few years ago. So that's what we're seeing. The government is essentially coming to borrow more from you and I in order to get some more funds to fund their operations.
Wow, well, that's pretty good.
Quickly, this was foreseeable because the moment the 850 billion was converted from external borrowing to domestic borrowing, people had expected that government would need to offer some incentive to domestic investors.
Right.
And it's very good that the coupon rates have been increased. But would that be sustainable in future auctions? That's one question. Two, people have been saying also that it's better to encourage domestic investors, particularly in the primary market, rather than relying, as we tend to do more in the secondary market, on foreign portfolio investors, many of whom are pulling out in the face of uncertainty. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rotus, and we'll see you tomorrow. Right. And moving on now for a more global business update, Michael Wilson joins us from London. Good morning, Michael. How are you today?
Morning, fine, thank you.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Good morning. A bit of a bear market yesterday, unfortunately, as far as things are concerned. Asian shares down overall about 2%. The MSCI index down about 1%. Anyway, basically bad news from the United States, which I'll come on to, and also a feeling that maybe there are going to be some new cases. There are going to be some spikes in the in COVID-19. Everybody's very, very worried about that. But we unlock together, don't we? I mean, we actually have to hold hands across our various territories and say, what are we going to do? We're going to have to take advice from you and so on. As far as the UK is concerned, the Chancellor, our Finance Minister, told us something, of course, that we know, that there is going to be an aggressive and a very significant recession in this country. The question is, how long will it be before we actually get out of it? Very interesting, you're showing pictures there of Piccadilly Circus with people there. There are very few people. However, some did go back to work yesterday, which I'll come on to. Now, as far as the United States is concerned, we were actually looking very, very hard at the chairman of the Fed, Jay Powell, to see what he would say. And what he's actually saying is that the US, it needs more money spent as far as to save the economy. What he did bat away was the prospect of negative interest rates in the United States. Now, that's something there was a lot of speculation about the other day. That clearly now is not going to happen. That would be anathema to most investors. It's happened in Europe, but the Americans are very much against that. What Powell is actually saying is, yes, we are throwing away the rule book. The OECD of course, has been warning that the debt is going to hang over the markets for a long time ahead. Well, we sort of know this. I mean, this is the way the world is actually going to be. The Democrats, now the Americans have already applied $3 trillion worth of fiscal stimulus to the economy. The Democrats want them to spend $3 trillion more. I suspect that the central bank governor in the United States is slightly moving into politics yesterday, but we'll see about that. What's really happening as well, and I'd like to ask you what you think about this, is the recalibration really of our relationship with China, given what's happened and given the fact China is either going to admit that something went wrong or it won't. But, you know, it was China's century is supposed to be the 21st, this particular century. The next one we feel is going to be Africa's because of the amount of investment that China actually has there. Now, clearly, Africa is going to have to be very careful about its relationship with China. The United States is already saying, OK, we're going to make our semiconductors onshore. We're going to cut supply chains with China as much as we can. The United Kingdom is also very worried about the kind of stuff that he gets from China, pharmaceuticals, consumer electronics, obviously, certain kinds of metals. Now, what's the future of these relationships? That is going to be very, very important indeed. And I know that's something which concerns a lot of African states. And finally, as far as my overall looks concerned, if there's anything you'd like to ask me, please do. The oil market inching slightly higher yesterday. Inventories in the United States slightly lower than people thought they were. People took that as being an indication that half the states are unlocking in the United States, and therefore there's more demand there. Maybe there's slightly more demand globally, but we've got a long way to go.
Well, quickly, Michael, I'd like to ask you, we know that, you know, the world this year faces the recession of all recessions. Absolutely. You use the phrase aggressive recession, either in the US or in Brazil or in the UK or even here in Africa. But between the UK and the US, we see two different responses. Jay Powell in the US is talking about fiscal stimulus. The US is planning to borrow more money, even if it has a debt load that is quite unprecedented. But in the UK, the plan is to raise taxes, cut public pay, and some people are saying that will affect economic growth in the long term. What do you think?
I think it definitely will. I think it's completely the wrong time to be cutting public spending. Think back to the United States after the Second World War, and certainly after the First World War, when they actually deliberately spent a huge amount of money in public infrastructure to get people to be back to work. As far as the higher taxes are concerned, then again, that's crimping what people will actually spend. And what every economy, every modern economy, wants the consumer to do is to spend more money. And that's really something that higher taxes will actually impede. So unfortunately, it may have to be the case, but it'll be a very, very delicate balancing act, as you rightly say.
Michael,
well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson, for joining us again this morning.
Certainly, and much agreed on that. Austerity is quite a rocky way to go. But for a more, or rather, a COVID-19 pandemic update now, we have Aaron Akerejola here with us to give us just that. Good morning, Aaron. How are you today?
Yeah, good morning, Leila.
Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Doctor. It's good to see you today.
No plan for Leila this morning.
I told you, those are reserved. Let's keep those reserved.
Okay, let's get straight into it. And looking at it this morning, and quite sadly, right now, every country in Africa has actually recorded a case, as Lesotho, which was the last country to not have recorded a case before now, have actually come out through their Ministry of Health to say that a national from who was studying in Saudi Arabia has actually, when the test came back from South Africa, has actually tested positive to COVID-19. As a matter of fact, 81 tests were done from those that came into the country from South Africa and Saudi Arabia, and 80 of those tests came back negative, and just one came back positive. But they have been scathing reactions and also criticism of the government, who lifted the ban because there was a lockdown between the 30th of April to the 5th of May. And against some ministerial advices, they lifted the lockdown after that because they claimed that they only have spaces for 148 beds at the moment, that the country was not ready to handle COVID-19 cases.
What's also rocky with that? Isn't their prime minister due to step down next week after his coalition collapsed in parliament? So it couldn't have come at a worse time for Lesotho.
So it's really sad. But they sent a further 598 tests to South Africa for testing, and let's see what actually comes out of that. But at the moment, looking at the African figures, you can actually see it on the screen there. 69,947 are the number of cases in the entirety of Africa, and 2,410 deaths at the moment, and 24,224 have recovered. And every single country on the continent of Africa have COVID-19.
Well, except that there was a positive story yesterday, I think, about Mauritius, that had about 322 cases, 32 cases, and then 322 have recovered fully, and then only 10 deaths. And now in Ghana, we discussed a case in a factory in Tema. Now that factory has reopened, and they say that, they're going to take every precaution. They've tested their staff who have gone negative, but we hope, of course, that they will provide workplace safety guidelines and take necessary precautions.
Certainly. And Ghana also using drones now to transport tests from rural areas to their two main cities. But yes, Aaron, thank you very much for today's global updates on COVID-19.